Whoopayum. And we're going to go ahead and give Monster Hunter World a review. I do not skip credits, so sorry guys. I believe everybody who worked on this game, men and women over there, over that way, you can't see my finger, they deserve their time on screen. So let's get started. First point is graphics. Graphically, this game is beautiful. It is a sight to behold. The monsters are incredibly well detailed. They're incredibly well designed. Music is loud. Okay, we can remedy that. There we go. But yeah, the monsters are incredibly well detailed and they are incredibly well designed. They all look good. With the exception of very few monsters, they are visually interesting and visually distinct enough that there's not really a whole lot of crossover between the monster species. The environments are nice and detailed. They're nice and varied as well. You don't really get sick of running, through the same paths over and over again because there's enough attention to detail to keep your attention the entire time. Even small little details are, well done and well implemented, I guess is the way to phrase it. Like, there's some muddying going on in some of the textures, but it's to be expected. And I think when the game is released on PC, I think it'll definitely hit its peak potential in terms of graphical fidelity. But all in all, personally, if I had to give the game a graphical score, I would have to give it a 9 out of 10. Looks really good. I had no issues. There were very few breaking textures, very few stretched textures, unfinished textures. The lighting was really well done. The game wasn't overly dark or overly bright in any situation. But I think with the potential for the PC release later on, I think that it will most likely be what I would consider to be one of the prettiest games out on the market. Secondly is gameplay. Gameplay is the bread and butter of Monster Hunter. The gameplay loop is very simple. It's take a quest, hunt large monster, carve large monster. Go back to town, make new gear, take quest, hunt large monster, carve large monster. Very, very simple gameplay loop, but it does it all well. You eventually get tired of hunting, the same Rathian 87 times to get all of the pieces, but the fights play out differently enough that it keeps you on your toes. This Rathian may, it may use a charging attack more frequently than what you're used to. It may, not use a charging attack, thus making it an easy fight. And with the exception of, in my opinion, Black Diablos, the only really unfair enemy in the game, most fights can be conquered with proper planning and skill. Uh-oh, do we have a new cutscene here? Maybe. Okay, never mind. But yeah, Black Diablos sucks. I do not like fighting Black Diablos at all. But outside of him, all of the fights are well done. They're all well executed. And so honestly, I would have to give it a 9.5 out of 10. It's near perfect. The only reason that I can't give it a 10 is because some of the hitboxes on some of the monsters are much too large. They are significantly larger than the actual part of the monster that's hitting you. And this is why Black Diablos, in my opinion, is the worst fight in the game. Is the hitbox on his tail, even at the base of his tail, is massively larger than his actual tail. So if you're near it, you're getting hit. The tail doesn't even have to touch you, you're getting hit. But I think if they could tighten up the hitboxes a little bit on a few of the fights, it would be dang near perfect. Sound design in the game. Sound design, I feel, in terms of monster sound, they did a great job. The monsters sound really good, and they sound different enough from one another that you can identify the roar from a Beetlejuice and a Rathian. Now, with the Rathian species, they all sound the same, because they're Rathians, but you can identify the monsters just by their sound. You don't have to see them, and I think that that's a good thing. The ambient sound in the game is well done, if not a little sparse. But I would say overall the weakest part of the game is probably in its soundtrack for, you know, the sound category. The soundtrack, I would have liked to have a few more ambient tracks for each location, not themes for monsters. Because if you're not fighting a monster and you're just running through a zone, you hear the same track all too frequently and it just becomes noise. But even with that having been said, I do think that the soundtrack is very good, but I think that it actually has a lot of room for improvement. And hopefully, you know, in the future with, you know, updates and monsters and that whole sort of thing, maybe they'll add some new sounds to the soundtrack queue. I don't know. But I would have to give the sound design an 8. I think with a few more soundtracks for each zone and a few more ambient sounds, it could have been significantly better. Level design in this game is just phenomenal. Each zone has its own little unique areas within it. Like in the Ancient Forest, you have, you know, the few little cave systems. You have the plains area, then you have the dense part of the forest. And then, you know, once you go up, you have the big giant tree. You have that sitting up there with the nest and the dam and all that. And then off to the top left of the map, you've got that intermediary area where it's not quite plains, but it's pretty heavily forested. But the canopy is open. And so, you know, with the variety in each zone and how visually distinct each zone is, I think that, you know, they did a phenomenal job with the level design in the game. The traversal is not a pain, which is fantastic. Usually in games like this, traversal is a nightmare. But in this instance, traversal is actually really well done, so I'm not going to complain too much there. Overall, I would have to give the level design in the game 9.5. Really, really well done. Again, no complaints there. And now, story. As you guys know, I put story on a pedestal above every other element in gameplay. I think that story is the most important. But Monster Hunter World is an exception. Well, Monster Hunter in general is an exception. Monster Hunter is not a narratively driven game. While it does have a story, and, you know, in some entries it's weaker than others, in this specific entry, I think this is the strongest narrative that the series has had, just based off of things that I've read. But even that being told, the narrative in this game is... it's just a thread work to take you from one fight to the next. It's completely superfluous to anything else in the game. You could have easily left off the entirety of the story, and the game would have still played the same. But the story was good, basic, bare bones, nothing, you know, supremely groundbreaking or anything. I'm gonna close Steam because I'm dropping frames pretty bad here. Yeah, that's why. Path of Exile decided to update. But no, the story, it's like I said, it's bare bones, threadbare. But it was fun, it was enjoyable. And so I'm going to rate the story a 7.5 because it is a very weak story. But that having been said, that doesn't detract from the rest of the game because you don't play a Monster Hunter game for the story, you play a Monster Hunter game for the monster fights. So that brings us to the overall story for the game. Or excuse me, the overall score for the game. Overall, I think that it did everything well. There were a few complaints here and there. Like I said, with the sound design, you know, I would have liked to have seen more soundtracks. Graphically, I would have liked just a little bit more visual variety in, you know, the individual areas in each zone. It would have been nice to see a little bit more flourishing going on, I suppose. And the story definitely could have been a lot better. But even with those things being laid out, I don't have any major complaints with the game. I'm at nearly 100 hours. I'm not sick of the game. I still enjoy Monster Hunter. I still enjoy going out and hunting monsters. Regardless of what it is, I still have fun hunting it. So, all told, I'm going to rate the game overall a 9.5. Like I said, with that story score being up there at 7.5, you would think that the overall score for the game should be lower. But honestly, no, because story is largely ancillary to the Monster Hunter experience. You don't need it.
How's it going?
But yeah, that's my overall experience with the game. What did you guys think? What are your thoughts?
Look who's here.
Let me know.
I knew it was only a matter of time. You ready